Right, good morning everyone, good morning colleagues, and good morning, a warm welcome to members of the public at the rear of the chamber. In terms of procedure, some of you are here just simply to observe debate, others have indicated to Lindsay that they wish to address the committee, and when we arrive at that part of the agenda, the lead officer will give a brief summary of the application, followed by the Vice Chairman who will invite you to address the committee. So without further ado, we'll attend to the agenda. And as usual, procedural items, declaration of interest. No, thank you. Confirmation of minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of November. Will you agree to it's a true record? Thank you. Substitute members, Lindsay.
Yes, Chairman, we should have three this morning, and they are Councillor Frank Andrews or Councillor Harrison, Councillor Clayton for Councillor Speak, and I'm expecting Councillor Collins, who will be subbing for Councillor Oates.
Good morning and welcome.
My apologies, I was held up with work, sorry.
Well, you haven't missed anything yet. Good morning to you, Frank and Alan. Decision items, planning matters. The batting order this morning is item 1, 4, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7. So we commence by attending to item 1. Smithy Cottage, Kirkham Road. Andrew?
Thank you, Chairman. Excuse me. Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, everybody. Just waiting for my presentation to load. Okay. There are speakers, so I'll do an introduction and then break for the speakers. So this application relates to a site at Smithy Cottage in Trails. It's land adjacent to Smithy Cottage actually. So you can see the Trails village there. It's generally in the sort of the centre part of the village if you take it that way. Derby Arms here. This is the road, car road down to Kirkham. So it's on the left-hand side if you're going from the Derby Arms towards Kirkham. It's an area of lands to the immediate south of Kirkham Road. The site is undeveloped, but there is an outline planning permission in place for 4 dwellings. And as with all of the parish of Kirkham, it's located in the countryside in the local plan allocation. The countryside allocation washes over the whole of the parish. The application in front of us is a full application for the erection of 4 two-storey properties. The comments that are in the agenda paper from the Parish Council refer to their support to the principle of the development, but they had some concerns over some amenity matters to do with the construction, and that's led to them to raise an objection. Hence the application was put to committee for a decision. We've also had some further quite detailed comments from the Parish Council, which came a couple of days ago. So those are in the late observation schedule. They revised their position to one of objecting to the development in its entirety, essentially. The officer recommendation, though, is to grant planning permission. So just to give you a little bit more detail of the scheme, to perhaps put some context to the respective speakers' comments. So the red line there is generally the application site. Smithy Cottage is a single-storey cottage property here. We've got Foundry Court properties to the rear and wrapping around here. And then there's this property here, which is called Smithy Farm. We've dealt with previous applications at a site called land east of Orchard Dean, which is the brown area that you see to the other side of the road. That's now being developed for 3 residential properties. So whilst this might not be at the heart of the village, perhaps where the Derby Arms is, you can see that it is an area that's surrounded by residential development. Just a couple of Google Street View pictures. So this is looking at the site from the direction of the Derby Arms. This is one of the properties on that land east of Orchard Dean that's currently under construction. A couple of slightly older pictures. So the site is essentially in this area that's here. That's Smithy Cottage. So the site's there. This is the garage to the Smithy Farm at the other side. So again, the site's in this area here. The scheme that we're looking at is for, like I say, the erection of 4 dwellings. So Smithy Cottage, Smithy Farm. So we've got a dwelling that sits between those, and then this access road that leads to a dormer bungalow property here, and then a pair of semi-detached 2-storey properties here. And at that point, I will break for the speakers.
Thank you, Andrew. Vice Chairman.
Hi, thank you. Can I reiterate the welcome to the public this morning, particularly those speakers that have committed their time. It's a very important part of the process in terms of scrutinising and judging applications, so thank you for making yourself available. The normal protocol is that speakers are given 3 minutes in which to say what they think. If the person is still speaking at the end of 3 minutes, I will gently intervene, and if that doesn't work, it might be slightly more robust. You've got 3 minutes in which we invite you up to the podium. On this particular item, can I just check? I think we have Gordon Smith here. Thank you, and welcome. Have we got Bruce Johnson on behalf of the applicant? Yes, and both of you wish to speak. So I'm going to ask Gordon Smith, first of all, to come up to the podium. I think you're fairly familiar with this procedure. So, whenever you're ready, you may begin, as they say. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, councillors. My name is Gordon Smith from Trails, Roscoe and Wallace Parish Council. Could we have slide 1, please, Andrew? Since our Parish Council first responded to this application on part of this rural orchard site, we learned that as a new full application, we should have assessed from first principles. Also, that safety authorities have now commented and the off-site construction approach remains unacceptable. The Parish Council and officers both agree that this countryside development provides no benefit. So, the only technical reason for support would be through Fyld's policy of minor infill and without impacting the character of this rural area unique in the Fylde. But it does impact and damage the character of this rural area. See here, through these steps, how the rural setting opposite Smithy Farm has changed to a large urban commercial form for no benefit. We are faced with creeping urbanisation. This is the 6th officer-supported minor infill application along Kirkham Road alone. As now, one past minor infill development often being used to justify the next. This is in conflict with the achievement of the vision for the Fylde, which commits to retaining and enhancing the rural character of the countryside and minimising the release of land for development. This application should be reviewed, therefore. Andrew, slide 2, please. The most recent definition we have from 2 Fylde appeals is that infill development is the infilling of a modest gap in an otherwise continuous built-up frontage. This application image here clearly shows that the gap is not modest. Plot 1 only occupies part of that gap. A rural roadside frontage of equivalent to 4 of the proposed semi-detached dwellings continues with orchard and protected trees. This isn't infill and the application should be refused. Andrew, slide 3, please. These are large buildings in a spacious layout with an abnormal, enormous, non-time limited off-site construction area. Construction facilities are the size of over 6 of the semi-detached dwellings and unnecessarily exposing an extra 5 of the Foundry Court residences to noise sources. We have 2 parish housing developments that are still in their construction phase after 10 years. Significantly, there also remains the off-site severe impact threats to pedestrians due to insufficient off-street parking with an undersized garage at plot 1, doubts over the feasible use of parking spaces, and inadequate footpath width provision. This is not minor, it has adverse impact and it should be refused. Slide 4, please, Andrew. Finally, with unusual forcefulness, Lancashire Highways requires refusal and reconsultation, and fire and rescue requires compliance. This has not been agreed. This application is evidently not safe now and needs to be refused. Thank you, councillors, and thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Thank you for that. And thank you for your prompt timing. I'm now going to ask Bruce Johnson, please. I always feel this is a bit like the mastermind thing where you sort of come up to the chair but there isn't one, you just stand there. And the microphone is still on, so whenever you're ready. Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me to speak today. Thank you very much. This is some hurried comments to reply of the Parish Council dated the 4th of December 2022, which I actually received at 8:20 on Monday evening. So I haven't had time to excessively go into this. But I feel that due to lack of sensible and substantive comment in the document, which is extremely repetitious, a repetitious missive, as one of our neighbours accurately describes it. We suspect this has been done to pad out what actually is a very weak objection, one with little substance. It is combative in tone, it's misleading and inaccurate in too many ways to discuss within the time frame of 3 minutes. Many of the comments are over-dramatised, so much that I wonder sometimes if the council do actually live in the parish. They discuss local knowledge and yet seem to possess very little of it. Conversely, my family has been in the blacksmiths, farmers and latterly builders in trails for over 100 years. I have personally lived in the village for over 55 of those years and intend to continue to do so. So if you need local knowledge, please be free to ask. I am happy to discuss this with you. I have an honours degree in sustainable development. I undertook a PhD in environmental management. I am also a qualified construction manager, and I've left my job this morning to be here today, with over 35 management years of experience. Along with my brother, we have built houses, worked on multiple building projects both around the country and overseas. And more importantly, we have very proudly restored Smithy Cottage, for which we won an award from the Fylde Borough Council. The restoration of Smithy Cottage was probably one of the most important developments in the current history of the village. So don't lecture us on the type of development which brings character to our environment. In this respect, our action speaks louder than words. The points of the Parish Council are chiefly refuted. Some comments are over-dramatised, others are blatantly untrue. I think fake news would be a current term here. The Parish Council has also seemed to have been derelict in the duty when assessing the application in the first instance and failed to respond to the application in a correct and timely manner, and with the alacrity that parishioners should become to expect of the Parish Council. It has always been a new application. The derivation 22/0525 in evidence of this. It has been a valid application since the 12th of July 2022.
Can I just point out that annoying sound indicates that you now have your 3 minutes, so
Okay.
I will allow you to complete the sentence.
Okay. And so it shouldn't come as a surprise in late November of 2022. Thank you.
And that, I think, concludes the speakers for item 1, so thank you for your time.
Andrew, in your presentation, in completing your presentation, you've got this potentially confusion with this position of the Parish Council. Originally they were agreement in principle. It has an outline permission. The latest correspondence suggests they're now against that principle. We just emphasise that in your presentation.
Yeah, I'll cover I think I should be able to cover those points. If not, please do ask me further questions at the end. Thank you, Chairman. Right, okay, so back to, this is the slide I showed previously, so this is the scheme that's in question. Just as a very quick reminder for you all, Smithy Cottage, existing single-storey dwelling here, Smithy House, two-storey house with a garage that you could see in one of those earlier images. So the proposal, two-storey dwelling here, access that leads up to a pair of semis and a detached dormer bungalow property. Just very quickly going through the properties that are proposed, because this is a full application, so we have all the details for the scheme. So this is plot 1, so this is a property on the front, on the road frontage, sorry. This is plot 2, so this is the dormer bungalow style property, integral garage, obviously larger footprint due to the unusual shape of that particular plot. And also the dormer bungalow style, and then a more modest pair of 3-bedroomed semi-detached properties, again with this approach to the design, with some of the windows provided in it's quite small there, but some of the windows provided in dormers cut through the roof line. Some CGI images that's been presented with the application to illustrate the plots as they would look. So again, I think we've had discussion at previous meetings about the materials that are being used in properties in trails. These clearly showing a grey roof, red brick type finish to those on the frontage to try and reflect the character of that village. So one of the points that I think the chairman highlighted there is, and it was touched on by the parish council's speaker, Mr. Smith, is that the planning history and why this application's with us. Because I think the planning application history here is perhaps more relevant than in other cases. There is an earlier planning application that was submitted, reference 19300 there. That was an outline planning application that was approved by committee March 2020, just before lockdown, and that approved 4 dwellings, it approved their access, it approved their layout, and it approved their scale. So in planning terms, the scale is the height of the buildings. That's extant for 3 years, so obviously that remains a relevant part of the planning history, because we're clearly within that time frame. The reserve matters to make that into effectively a full permission was submitted last September, so that dealt with the appearance of the dwellings and the landscaping of the site. It was during the assessment of that application that it came clear that the appearance submitted for the plots on plots 2 to 4 was taller than the scale of the outline permitted. So that meant there was a need to revise, 2 options: either revise the elevations to meet the approved scale, or submit a new planning application in an attempt to secure planning permission for the scheme as they presented it last year. The applicants chose the latter of those, and the full application for those 4 dwellings is what we're faced with determining today. So that's a little bit of the background about the scheme. This current application was submitted in sort of the later summer, and has always been for the erection of 4 dwellings. Just to show you the scheme against the previous one. So the one on the left has planning permission, the one on the right is what we're now being asked to look at. So you can see there, clearly there are minor differences in terms of some of the where the hard surfaces are shown, and the road route changes very slightly, but it is essentially the same scheme. You recall the elevations that I showed you a few slides ago of the properties. Well, these are the properties that were approved as part of the outline. So this is the scale of the dwellings. So it is a single dwelling on the front, a pair of semis towards the rear, and then this dormer bungalow style property into that back corner. So there are, again, similarities between the scheme that was approved at the outline. This is the scale drawings from the outline approval. And the scheme that's being presented today. Just touching on the parish council's comments, which you asked me to, Chairman. As in the agenda reports, their original position was to support the development of the dwellings, but to express some concerns over the construction management and the reinstatement of the site compound. With this being a full application, the applicant has presented a construction management plan as part of the application. It's normally something that will be dealt with by condition, but in this case, because of the outline being in place, they submitted the construction management scheme up front. So that gives some details that the construction works will be limited to daytime hours, or noisy construction works will be limited to daytime hours as normal. The construction compound is to be sited on land that's alongside the dwellings. Now that is slightly an unusual situation. It's normal that the dwellings occupy the majority of the site, therefore the construction compound is situated on that site. In this case, the circumstances are that the applicants have other land alongside the site that has an access, isn't in any obvious active use, so they've chosen to propose to use that land for their construction compound, their offices, their material stores, the contractor parking, which to my mind seems a useful way of allowing that to take place without working within the slightly more constrained site area that's available to them. In terms of addressing the Parish Council's concerns over that, there are conditions on the agenda papers to require that the construction management plan is followed and that the area is reinstated following the completion of construction. We have an enforcement team, Chris at the back there. He has active engagement with site managers across the borough in terms of making sure that construction works comply with those controls. Following the receipt of those comments and when this agenda was being compiled, I approached the parish clerk to explain this matter to them, and since then there's been some engagement with Mr Smith, who I understand leads for the parish council on planning matters now, and that's resulted in some further comments being received, which, as Mr Smith spoke to you about, deal with the principle of the development and argue that it's not minor infill development, as is perhaps the opportunity
Just on that point,
in GD4.
Andrew, previously when the
Yes, Chairman, just I'm not sure your microphone was on, but just for anybody who didn't hear that, the previous application, or the current outline planning permission, was determined in March 2020. That was following the adoption of the current filed local plan, albeit in its prior to revised version. It was revised in December 21, but the substance of policy GD4 that's in place now is the policy of GD4 that was in place there. So there was an assessment against as whether it complied with minor infill at that time, and in fact the case officer's stolen much of the report from the March 20 report into this officer report that you're getting here today, because the assessment is the same. So this is just coming back to the construction management plan just very briefly. This is the construction plan that's been supplied. So the application site is this area, and the applicant has proposed his construction on this land to the side. So that has an existing access point. It allows an access to be taken through there, and it allows these properties to be built and materials stored and what have you, without the same level of disturbance to this part of Kirkham Road that would occur with development through the intended eventual site entrance. As Mr Smith says, that does perhaps bring some potential disturbance to neighbouring properties. There are properties to the south here. There are properties here, Orchard Dean, there's another property next to it here. And with that in mind, and the properties over here, with that in mind, there's rather controls over the hours of working and days of working, as with any construction site of this scale. So that's included in that construction management plan. Last slide from me is to pull all the policy assessment together. So this is essentially summarising what's in the report. Sites in the countryside, development in the countryside locations is restricted, but one of the restrictions is whether it complies with minor infill, because minor infill development in countryside areas is accepted. There are three sort of elements to that we look at. First of all, is it minor? Well, we would look at the scale of the location in that respect. So with Trails being a village, albeit not a designated settlement, it is still a village. So 4 dwellings was accepted as being appropriate in that location, whereas if it was somewhere that was much more remote, 1 dwelling as an infill plot might be the extent of what's acceptable as being minor. But because you're in that village environment, the 4 dwellings here were accepted previously and are accepted again as meeting the minor requirement of minor infill. With regards to infill, there is a definition that we have. There isn't a definition in the local plan, but there is a working definition that we've used as officers, which is, as Mr. Smith quoted, that it's a development in an otherwise, a modest gap in an otherwise built-up frontage. There are dwellings either side of this site. If we go back to the first slide I showed you, there are dwellings across the road, there are dwellings behind. So the view taken by officers is that this is an infill site. So that essentially allows that minor infill element to be satisfied. There is also a requirement for the development to respect the rural character of the area in the supporting text to policy GD4, and with the design approach, with the mix of dwellings, with the materials that are being taken, with the landscaping that's provided around the site, the officer view again on that is that there is a no harmful impact on the landscape from the development. Talked earlier about the planning history. That is a consideration in our decision. This site has planning permission for 4 dwellings. Where it differs from the planning permission is that the scale is larger. Now it is, whilst they are taller, 700-800 mil, perhaps isn't particularly, not excessively taller, and the ones that are taller are the ones that are set to the rear of the site. The site on the front, the property on the frontage is the same as that which was previously approved. They sit alongside the more modern and slightly elevated Stanley farmhouse, and they sit opposite, or almost opposite, the Orchard Dean properties, and they are much smaller than the Orchard Dean properties that are under construction. The speaker, Mr. Smith, talked about the access. This is as previously approved. There's no concerns over network capacity, given that it's almost directly to the road. The Highway Authority have raised some comments where they've asked for a number of matters to be clarified, and if those matters aren't clarified, they've said they would object. Now, the scheme provides an appropriate turning head. It provides appropriate parking, if not in the garages, certainly on the driveways to the garages. So those concerns of the Highway Authority are satisfied. One area that isn't is that the highway engineers have asked for a 2-metre wide footway to be provided across the entire frontage of the site. Now that's a standard engineering solution to new development that you might, well, that you would normally expect in a more urban environment. In this location, there's a 1.2 metre wide footway across the site frontage. So it's not as if there isn't a standard pedestrian width footpath available. It's just not to the larger, perhaps excessive standard that the Highway Authority have suggested. Providing that footway will have a more harmful impact on, or a more urbanising impact, and more, as a result of being a rural village, a more harmful impact on trails So it's not one that we feel should be taken forward in the planning decision, and therefore we haven't suggested any revised plans as a consequence. Neighbour impacts are all acceptable in terms of separations and massing distances and that sort of thing. So the conclusion of officers is that this application should be recommended for approval.
Councillor Ahmed, followed by David.
So, Andrew, just to reiterate, this has planning permission for almost exactly what's been asked for, and we're discussing 70 centimetres of height, 2.5 feet. That's what we're discussing here. That's the only difference from what's already got planning permission, and that this committee approved that within the last 2 years. If this was, if it was rejected on appeal, there's almost not a hope in heck, because we've just given it planning permission apart from 70 centimetres. So the discussion is just 70 centimetres, and that's the only thing that's different. That's my first question. Is that correct?
Yeah, the difference between this scheme and that has been presented on the reserve matters relating to the outline planning permission is essentially, it boils down to the increase in scale of the dwelling. 700, 800 mil difference. So the applicant does have the opportunity of, if this were to be refused, the applicant would have the opportunity of refusing that. They would also have the opportunity of revising their existing reserve matters application to lower the properties.
Yeah, so they could exactly just go back. If we rejected it today, they could go back, build the 4 properties of the same scale, the same size, just 70 centimetres lower.
Yeah, there's an outstanding application that would need. There's an outstanding application that would need determining, but that would be an option to them.
And I think you've addressed most of the other points. And I mean, sometimes LCC just don't think, do they? I mean, putting a Clifton Drive wide 2-metre pavement in the middle of the countryside, you'd either have to destroy all the hedgerows or take all the road out. It's ludicrous. So I don't think we've got any choice but to approve this. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. If I could just clarify something with Andrew, please. And I think from part of his presentation, I perhaps know what the answer is, but I just wanted to clarify. The Parish Council have stated the highway authorities are not satisfied, whereas the officer's report states that they have no objections. So I'm assuming the only way in which they're not satisfied relates to this pavement that we were talking about, which would be, I agree with Councillor Ahmed, would be rather odd to widen the pavement to 2 metres in a village where the rest of it is 1.2 metres. But is that correct, Andrew, that the highway authority doesn't have objections? Because
the highway authority comments, they have a style of writing their comments that is a little confusing at times. So if you look at the bottom of page 7, their comments state, and I'll read the first paragraph out, LCC Highways does not have any objections in principle to the proposed residential development of 4 dwellings. And they go on. So my reading of that is that they don't have a concern about putting 4 dwellings there, but the rest of their letter then talks about elements that they feel should be dealt with, which are perhaps the detail, to ensure that that's brought forward properly. So those are the bullet points at the top of page 8, and then they conclude by saying if those matters aren't resolved, then they would object. So they kind of start off saying it's okay, and then say why it's not, and then conclude. So it is a little bit confusing.
You're satisfied that those matters have now been dealt with or will be dealt with?
Yeah, since those comments came in, we've sought some revised plans which indicate that you can provide the standard of parking on the properties, that the turning heads are achievable in terms of getting bin wagons in and what have you, and they've moved the tree that they were concerned about being potentially obstructing sight lines from the landscaping scheme. So the only perhaps area between what they've suggested and what's currently being proposed is their proposal or their recommendation for a 2-metre wide footway, which is obviously I've mentioned.
Thank you, Chairman. This is just a very small point on clarification and the disturbance to the neighbours. The first speaker, I think, said that they were still building one of the properties 10 years after they started. So clearly 10 years disturbance is a bit much. is there any timescale when a planning application like this is passed and when it must be completed? Because 10 years is a bit heavy to be next door to a house being built.
Glad to have it, something rather unusual. So.
Yeah, there isn't. So when we grant a planning permission, there is a time limit by which that permission must be implemented, but there's no, there's no time limit by which it must be completed. So the circumstances that I believe the parish council are referring to, if I've got the right slide on the screen, the Foundry Court was granted planning permission under various various applications over a period of around 10 years, perhaps even longer. Of those properties, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I think there's a terrace of 3 there, have been completed. Work has started on these 4, but hasn't actively taken place for some time. So that work, because they've started on those plots, they could continue those. And I understand that the developer is marketing those, and obviously the property market, or whatever the reasons are, he hasn't got a buyer, so he's not building them until he has a buyer. So those would be adjacent to this site, would be adjacent to the compound. And so I think that's probably the background to where the parish council's comments come from.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I had 2 questions. I think both of them have actually been touched on, so I won't labour that too much. But just a quick question regarding the discussions with Lancashire County Council Highways. I know that officers have come back with recommendations to overcome the bullet points, but has that dialogue taken place with LCC to engage with them to see whether they would change their recommendation to not, because what basically saying is they want to refuse unless these are dealt with. Now you say that you've dealt with that, but what's the response from LCC to see what their reaction to what your reaction was?
Yeah, I must admit we haven't gone back to them on this in this instance. The application was received July, whenever it was. Their comments were received, I think 2 days before the agenda for this committee closed. So given that protracted timescale in getting their initial comments, we haven't gone back to them on them. We had to sort of review the situation relatively speedily to ensure that the application made this agenda, because clearly it's been with us for some time. But notwithstanding the confusion I referenced earlier, their points are clear what they're asking for. So it wasn't as if it would, there was any uncertainty that over what their proposals were. But I must admit we haven't gone back to them to seek that clarification of their views on the basis of 4 out of 5 of their comments being addressed.
On that, may I come back, Chairman? On that point then, if that dialogue did take place and Highways still stood their ground and wanted to refuse, how would that leave the recommendation at that point?
This committee can override the county.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to add to that, the Highway Authority are a statutory consultee, and clearly one that we will take very seriously. But the decision to be made is via councils, and planning legislation, planning guidance in the MPPF says we should only refuse matters on highways safety grounds where there is a severe consequence of it. Now, I would struggle to argue to you as a committee that a footway being 1.2 metres wide rather than 2 metres wide in a village environment where there's no primary school next door or anything like that you're going to see lots of foot traffic is going to lead to a severe highway safety issue. So even if they had restated their objections, I would fully expect that the recommendation that I will be putting to you as a committee would be the one that I'm putting to you today.
Could I just come back to my other point, Chairman, as well? Regarding the construction site, looking at the plan, it says quite a large proportion of the entire site. and the question was asked about the time scale of how long that would be in operation. What I would like to know is that particular area designated purely and simply to the construction of those houses that are within the application, and is there any condition that would prevent it being used for any other purpose? I noticed these things like concrete crushers and so on and so forth in the construction plan. So I want to make sure that it is purely and totally related to that particular site.
Yeah, the application doesn't include that area, so it doesn't permit that, it doesn't authorise that as a construction, as a waste transfer station or a parking area or anything like that.
Yeah.
The only use of it is authorised as part of this development through its construction work. So if this was, let's say the planning permission was granted, the 4 houses were built, and this site continued to be used for storage of materials, general parking areas, offices, then that will be unauthorised development that will be subject to enforcement action by the council.
Yeah.
Because this permission wouldn't make any difference to that. There is a condition, because it's within the applicant's ownership, it's within the blue line of the application site, there is a condition that requires, I think it's condition 13 from memory, that requires that area is, and it's not been formatted correctly on the scheme, on the agenda papers, but it's on page 18, that following the first occupation of the final dwelling, that site has to have been reinstated, and that is something that we would pursue with the applicants and pursue through enforcement action if required, to ensure that there is an effective reinstatement of that area.
So that would be carefully monitored, Andrew.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chair. Regarding the sort of holding area for construction materials and construction, it's off-site. It's actually not where the houses are being built. Am I right in thinking that?
Yeah. Sorry,
Right. Yeah. So, how are they getting? I mean, they're not going to move it one brick at a time, are they? They're going to be construction vehicles moving amounts of building materials. How are they getting from that construction compound to the site? Are they having to go right round onto the road, or is there a direct access into it?
The construction, this is the aerial image, so the red line is the application site,
Yeah.
so the red line is where the 4 dwellings are, Councillor. The construction site is into this area here, so that has its own access, which serves these sort of dilapidated farm buildings. So the construction work would all take place this way. So one of the final tasks in the development will be the formation of the access that's to serve the development onto Kirkham Road. So all the construction traffic will be coming in this way without having to come round and go onto Kirkham Road.
I can't see how it gets to it. There's buildings there. Is there?
That building will be demolished if it hasn't already been. It's some time
Right.
since I've been there. But on the construction plan,
Right.
the construction plan shows that as being, you see you've got this access route through, and then this access point coming through, and
Right.
a turning area to get through.
Yeah,
to
it's
it.
just that aerial photograph doesn't sort
It
of
doesn't,
show it
no,
like
that's why I
that.
wanted
It
to- I
makes
wanted-
it look like they've got to go all the way around on the road,
Exactly,
which then
no,
would be an issue, I think.
Yeah,
but
I'm
if it's
sorry,
not-
I wasn't clear on that earlier.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that clarification. Vice Chairman.
Just finally, a couple of points. Most of the points I was going to raise have been answered anyway, so that's a good thing. In terms of this compound, you mentioned that it was quite unusual to have the compound outside the actual building site. Would I be right in saying actually there may be some advantage to that, in the sense that sometimes when you have a compound within the building site, that can constrain the development in terms of getting all the houses finished and developed, whereas this is off-site and it means you can deliver that site more quickly. So might there be some advantages? I'm thinking in terms of the impact of noise and disturbance, etc., for people in Smithy Cottage, etc., and all the rest of it, with these vehicles trailing around the edge of the curtilage.
Yeah, I mean, it aids the logistics, I think,
Yeah,
because it allows for more space to be available. So you can see from the image there, there's more space available for contractor parking. There's more space available for storage. So let's say if, you know, I don't know, plot 1 or plot 2 was sold before plots 3 and 4 were built, then that would have impacts in terms of how it was to be built without this land being available. So I think there probably are logistical benefits, but again, it's something that that can be dealt with through the conditions to ensure that the amenity of the future occupiers as well as the existing occupiers around the site are protected by the time limiting nature that we're proposing.
Yeah, I've simply pointed out that in my view, there should be some potential for actually that being an advantage in terms of delivering the 4 houses on that site rather than a disadvantage, and might therefore lead to a shorter time on site in terms of the activity than might be the case if you had the compound within the site itself.
Yeah, one of the obviously there's active, or not obviously, but there is active construction site over the road at Orchard Dean. Now that's almost finished, but we have had, and Chris will vouch for this, we've had some queries about how that construction site has taken place, with contractor parking on the road. There's been traffic signals a number of times that have been needed. Now some of those are for service connections, but also it's created some inconvenience perhaps in the village, where having this additional area perhaps may avoid the need for at least some of that, and allow for a smoother construction for all concerned.
And finally, to do with condition 5 really, because in the conclusion there's a reference to replacement tree planting that would ensure the longevity of the green infrastructure provided by the site within the village. And it says, and the reserve landscaping scheme could introduce. Should that be will introduce new replacement tree planting and firm up what the actual conditions in 5 are, which are specific in terms of replacing and putting additional trees in? I'm only saying that landscaping and trees are really important, aren't they, to this development in terms of sort of fitting in with the local character, etc. It's just curious that in condition 5 it mentions in detail, but actually on page 14 in the conclusions it talks about could introduce new replacement tree planting. Shouldn't it be will?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that's probably a consequence of the evolution of the scheme later on,
Yeah.
as we had a couple of revised plans relatively late in the process as we were dealing with the highway matters that I addressed later.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Thank you.
We will take that into recognition that we were going to be for condition 5.
No, we don't need to, because the
It's-
planning condition 5 is provides
It does.
Fine.
clarity
Yeah.
that the report asks for.
Yeah, it
Thanks
does.
for that
Yeah.
clarity. It's been moved for approval by Councillor Tim Armott, seconded by David O'Rourke. All in favour of approval, please show. Anyone against? That's unanimous, thank you. And we'll stay in the area by going to item 4. Newhall Farm, Rosica, which is on page 56, commencing.
Okay, there's again speakers, so I'll do an introduction on this one. That looks like a red circle in the middle of a sea of green, doesn't it? M55, Fleetwood Road, Walls, Rosica, Elswick, so rural area. The application relates to Newhall Farm, which is one of two farms farmed together, Newhall Farm and Rosica Hall Farm, dairy and beef cattle farms. So this is an area that's part of a field, access from a track that's also a public right-of-way, and it's around 300 metres from the settlement of Walls. It's in the countryside again, and this application is a retrospective one for the construction of a slurry lagoon, which is to accommodate slurry from that joint farming enterprise. The Parish Council have objected to this because they feel that whilst agricultural development in the countryside is something that is in accordance with policy GD4, they don't believe that there's a need for this agricultural development. So that's essentially the basis of their objection to it. And the officer recommendation here is for approval. Just before I give way to the speakers, I'll just give you a little bit more clarity to it. So this is the area in question. So this is Walles, Rosica. I've indicated the two farms, the area of the lagoon. It sits alongside an existing lagoon that's roughly the same size. That's a plan to show it, albeit it's not very clear in terms of the size. But it's 60 metres by 23 metres by about 5 metres deep. So it is a fair size. And I've got some pictures to show you later to illustrate that. But at the speakers.
Thank you, Andrew. I know we've got Gordon Smith here, who's remained, so thank you for that. Do we have the applicant here? I don't think we do. I don't believe they're intending to attend. No, it's just sometimes when they're down on the list, I just want to check. Okay, so we've only one speaker on item 4. So Gordon Smith, if you'd like to come forward, that would be great. I'm not going to repeat the protocol because I think everybody understands it now. Thank you. Whenever you're ready.
Hello again, councillors. I'm still Councillor Smith. This type of agricultural application used to be assessed by a qualified and experienced land agent. The Parish Council would of course be supportive of local needs met legally. It has just assessed the application before us. Supported by slurry capacity data from application 14619 for a previous slurry lagoon development adjacent to this current application. This 2014 application stated that the enterprise had a pre-application capacity of 3860 cubic metres. The slurry lagoon being applied for then would boost the capacity to 8406 cubic metres for the then 680 cattle. With a slurry requirement of 6,900 cubic metres, the already approved 8406 cubic metres appears more than sufficient. I have some copies of the applicant's calculations for 2014 if you want to confirm this. There have been no new figures logged on the file planning website for this application. If there were, we'd look at them. The Parish Council have not been approached to reassess its conclusion. As Andrew says, it's a retrospective application, yet in conflict with the Environment Agency's requirements, they still appear not to have been consulted. So even now, the report is unable to confirm whether the application development is safe. The information presented for the first time in the officer's report still doesn't seem to show a farm need. The officer's report states that the enterprise slurry capacity is currently 3860. But this is what it was back in 2014 before even the new lagoon then was proposed. That is the lagoon next to the one in this application. So the current capacity should logically be 8406 from implementing the 2014 approval. Who's been out to check this? The report says the maximum slurry capacity to meet the government guidance of 4-month storage would be 4 times 1362, i.e. 5448 cubic metres. So given the capacity post 2014, i.e. 8406, there remains no evidence for a need based on the past declarations that justified the last lagoon. Furthermore, there is not even consistency in the capacity about this new lagoon. The applicant's design and access statement declares that the new lagoon will have a capacity of 1 million gallons, i.e. 4545 metres cubed, but the officer report now states a capacity of only 3240. From the data you've previously been presented with, there is still no need. The data in the current officer report is in conflict with the publicly shown data with this application and the past data presented to support development in 2014. This is an unsatisfactory set of inconsistent data and needs to be checked transparently. Thank you, councillors.
Thank you very much for that. And that concludes the speakers on this particular item. So,
Andrew? Okay, thank you. Right, so we're talking about the construction of a slurry lagoon, and as it's retrospective, I do have some images of that lagoon. So this is the access track. So you come down this access track from Walls, and then you get this field gate, and the lagoon in question is the one that's beyond that banking that you see here. So this fence is at the top of the lagoon sides. The second picture here is looking back down towards Wallis. The track's on the right-hand side. So you can, and this is a fencing that's around the existing authorised lagoon. So what you can see is that you've got a relatively flat landscape with some hedgerows to screen and separate fields and tracks and the like. These are the two lagoons in question. So the one on the right, these pictures are taken like that. So the one on the right is the existing lagoon from 2014, and you can see that that's pretty much full of slurry. I didn't check the depth, but you know, it looks near the top to me. The one on the left is the newly constructed one. It's constructed this summer, and obviously that doesn't have any slurry in it. It just has a bit of rainwater that's gathered at the time of visit. But they are the same size. They sit alongside each other, 10, 15 metres apart, and are the same physical area, although I'm told that there are variances in their depth and variances in their banking, which gives the slopes of the banking, which gives some differences between their actual capacity. Just a couple of other views. So this is looking down the side of the new lagoon. So we've looked one way, looking the other way, looking north here. You can see again the landscape remains flat, copses of trees, and this lagoon sort of it's obviously visible from this close view with the fencing around it, and likewise that is as well looking at the existing lagoon. So as a summary slide position, site is in the countryside. Policy GD4, Section A this time, allows for development that is needed for agriculture. This site is part of a large-scale agricultural enterprise, the two farms together. I think in 2014 they had around 400 cows on the site. They're now advised that they have around 800 cows on the site. Now, we've done some work looking at government guidance, DEFRA websites and what have you, and there are published figures for the amount of slurry that each cow will produce per month, which is different amounts for different types of cows. So a beef cow has less than produces less than a dairy cow. So we've tried to do some calculations based on that. Those calculations to try and satisfy ourselves whether there is a need for it, irrespective of the comments that have been put in by the applicant. So I've got some figures on the slide there about the amount of storage that was available in the 2015 application and how that gives 2.8 months. Government guidance is that you should have 4 months. Government guidance is actually changing to require up to 6 months minimum capacity. And in fact, the government's giving out something called the Slurry Infrastructure Grant to help farmers achieve 6 months storage capacity. Because more storage allows them to obviously keep it without releasing it onto the fields, and it's a useful fertiliser, but it can also lead to pollution if it gets into the watercourses at too great a rate. So that's where farmers are being encouraged to support store greater on site. So looking at the figures that I've put together, the proposal would come to around 5.2 months. Now that's obviously somewhere between 4 and 6. It may be that there is additional storage capacity that I haven't calculated into it, so it may be that there is more than 5.2 months available with these two lagoons, but I'm not entirely sure that matters too much. This is a farming business that's trying to look at their forward planning and perhaps future expansion, and they're doing development that's inobtrusive in the landscape. It's something that operates to serve their business purposes. Their fertiliser that's produced on the site is obviously cheaper than fertiliser that they buy in. So if they've done this to assist their business moving forward, if they've doubled the number of cattle that they've got on site, it would seem relatively straightforward to conclude that this is something that's a suitable form of development for an agricultural enterprise to do. It's some distance from any residential property. The lagoon operates primarily through umbilical pipes, so they connect it to the farm through pipes and then fill it that way. So the vehicle movements aren't necessarily that extensive, and obviously they have field access to these areas as well. So given that there is a reasonable likelihood that there is a need for it, and that it is appropriate development that's rural in nature and doesn't have a particular impact on the landscape, the officer recommendation is one for approval. Just picking up on a point that was raised by the speaker about the Environment Agency, where it was said that they haven't been consulted on the application. They have been consulted on the application, and their comments are on page 59 of the agenda papers. They begin by saying that they raise no objection to it, but a bit like the Highway Authority in the last one, they highlight the need to comply with their own legislation in terms of managing water pollution and the like. Now, planning decisions are based on planning policies and assume that other legislation is being complied with. So the fact that there may not be a permit in place, which is what that legislation requires, isn't something for us to concern ourselves with in terms of this decision. It is something that's been highlighted to the applicant's agent, so that may well be the reason why the lagoon has no slurry in it, because they are going through the permitting process for that. But that's outside of our decision. Our decision today is based on the planning merits, which I feel here recommend approval of the scheme.
Thank you, Chair. I don't see any issue with this at all. I'm not a farmer and I'm not educated to be consulted on anything about farming matters, but to my mind, why would you want to have a second one of those if you didn't need it? If you weren't going to use it for farming, it's not profitable, it's not for anything other than what you need it for on your land and to continue with your farming business. That's all I can see with it, so I'm happy to propose.
Yeah, happy to second. It's a massive, in a way, recycling compost heap. The cows produce the muck, it sits there, it goes nice and ripe, it gets put back on the ground. It's a cheap recycling way to manage a farm. So, and it's created a pond in the countryside, a quarter of a mile from the nearest residence. So, yeah, happy to approve.
All in favour of approval, please show. That's unanimous, thank you. Do we need Andrew for this one or not?
I don't think so. We've got Marcus back up.
Before we attend to item 2, I forgot to mention apologies for Kieran Mulholland. He's gone to Christie's this morning for treatment. I've wished him well. I had a pint with him last night, and I should have mentioned it at the beginning of the meeting. It's his birthday today, yeah. Item 2, Wheaton Camp.
Thanks, Chair. Morning, everybody. Agenda item 2 is next for your consideration, which is at Wheaton Barracks, Singleton Road in Wheaton. Full application for demolition of an existing accommodation block, which consists of 59 apartments, and the construction and replacement of a 3-storey block of 69 single living accommodation units. The building for demolition is to the north, and then the site of the new building is located immediately to the south. I've included the aerial image on the left hand side just to demonstrate the extent of the existing barracks. It's home to the 2nd Battalion, Duke of Lancaster's Regiment. It's a countryside location that's located a kilometre north of Wheaton Village. It's approximately 50 hectares in size. It's roughly split in two. There's an east-west road. It's a public road, has no through route. Serves a farm holding with various businesses here, and a primary school, a public private school that's within the grounds of the barracks. It's allocated as a major developed site in the countryside within our local plan. No speakers, so just a few photographs. That's the building for demolition in front of you. The scheme forms part of a national rollout by the MOD for improvement of single living accommodation throughout their housing stock. It's reported that there are significant problems with retention of personnel, recruitment of new personnel because of the standard of living accommodation, and obviously that's having an effect on their capability to deliver a defence service to the UK. The building in question, there's a number of existing self-accommodation blocks on Wheaton Barracks at the moment. This is reported to be the worst of a bad bunch. It's dated, has poor internal accommodation, and doesn't meet modern living standards anymore. This is the application site where the accommodation will be moving to. It's car park at the moment, hard surfaced, and that hard surface forms part of a larger area used by the battalion as a parade area. Just a few photos of the surrounding the application site. So we can see in the top left we've got tree-lined streets, some of the buildings located to the west, and then to the south, which is it's probably more open, more natural in appearance, where it meets with that east-west road that I referred to earlier. Just a few photos of buildings around the site. As you can see, there's a variance of scale, 2, 3 and 4 stories, large pylon structures, mix of roof form. Of what character there is, it's formed by the materials of the building, so we've got predominantly red brick and tile. Just a few more examples of the variance of scale of buildings, and then the bottom images just show the openness of the site when viewed to the south. So the proposal itself, I say that the demolition of the building is in this location, looking to relocate to this location. As you can see, it's set within the existing built form on site. It's a brownfield plot borne by the existing car park in use. It doesn't extend beyond the existing build line that's formed by the buildings presently on site along this kind of route. Again, we've got a bit of landscaping to the southern boundary, which is along here. Again, that's just where that public accessible road runs through. And we've received a revision of the scheme that relocated the bike and bin store areas from the frontage of the building to the rear of the building so that this frontage space becomes more usable. It's probably the more prominent elevation of the site, so it's going to hide the smaller incidental structures to the back of the building. The site that's going to be demolished, that's going to be left open. It's going to have a simple landscaping feature, just grass and trees. Elevations wise, the drawings themselves don't really do the development justice, as you can see, so I've dropped in that visual. So that just shows the 3-storey scale. It shows the recessed nature of windows framed by the brick pier columns. The height of the building is slightly larger than what you would expect from a 3-storey building. That's borne primarily because there's roof-mounted solars on the structure, so they've raised the height of the building through a parapet to screen the solar panels from view when seen from street level. Just a quick snapshot of floor plans. We've got a central communal area on ground first and second floors, which encompasses kitchens, lounge, dining room areas, and then you've got the accommodations set either side of that central communal access arrangement. So in terms of issues, so the site's in countryside. It's allocated as a large development site in the countryside. Both policies, GD4 and GD5, offer support in principle. That is subject to impact on countryside and heritage and a number of other criteria which is detailed in policy GD5 itself. So in terms of countryside and heritage impact, it's a simplistic form, the scale and materiality of the buildings are reflective of existing buildings on site. It's a brownfield. I know you talked about infill before. I don't think for the purposes of countryside it's infill. It's probably more of a gap site, but it infills between existing buildings which are in the building group. The site isn't prominent in the landscape. If I just take you back to the aerial image quite quickly. So yeah, it's not prominent in the landscape. The main public vantage points are from Singleton Road, which runs in a north-south direction. The boundaries to the barracks along this elevation are very heavily wooded, mature tree landscaping. So any views that you would get would be from this east to west access road. So it's not a through road, so public use isn't going to be very high other than associated to the junior school or to the farm holdings that it also serves. So yes, it's not seen to be prominent in the landscape. Where it can be seen, it's visible against the backdrop of the existing built form. It wouldn't be seen in isolation. So on that basis, it's determined that it has minimal harm to the character of the countryside in that particular location. There's no heritage assets within the area, the closest being in Wheaton village itself, which is approximately 1.5 kilometres away. Points B, C, D, E and F, they refer to the other relevant criteria in policy GD5. I think the main one really relates to highway safety. I think we've got to bear in mind though that this development relative to a net increase of only 10 units, bearing in mind that there's demolition aspects in the scheme. It makes use of the existing access arrangement into the barracks. That's the secure access. It's the only way in, it's the only way out. It does result in removal of a large car parking area. Now, I've been to the site a few times now, and it's never ever been heavily parked up. There are other parking areas within the barracks, and the applicant has, from the perspective that any surplus displacement as a result of this scheme certainly can be accommodated on those existing car parking areas. There's no other technical matters to note, so recommendation is to grant approval.
Thank you, Chair. I've been on the site, like yourself, quite a lot of times over the years, and I've actually been in those blocks, and they're horrendous. How any young men who join the army get put in them and stay, it is beyond me. 'Cause one of my comments at the time to the sergeant on site was, why do you expect young men to live in this? They're leaving their homes and going to this. It's horrific. So any modernisation is, in my eyes, is well and truly acceptable and much needed on that site, because there are some of the bedrooms are they're horrific. I wouldn't like my son to be in one of them, so I'm happy to move approval for the building.
Yeah, happy to second. It's interesting this. You probably know I've got 2 nephews serving at the moment, and the big thing that they're finding at the moment is no one's living on camp. Everyone's living at home. So I'm surprised they're actually going to spend this huge amount of money because it's a home working for soldiers now for most of them. I'm also, even some of the Wheaton guys I know are living in Blackpool with their mums and dads and only pop in when they need to do some training. It's a different world now. It's not like the old days of you're in barracks, you live in the barrack block. I mean, the block they're demolishing there is probably 30 years more modern than the one that I lived in when I was in. But I am surprised they're spending all this money. But yeah, of course I'll support it, because anything we can do is great. But that car park, as you say, is empty because they're probably all still at home with their mums and dads, not on site. So I'm not sure what the purpose of the block is going to be when it's built. But yeah, why not?
By Councillors Jane Nixon, seconded by Councillor Tim Armitt. All in favour, please show. Thank you, that's unanimous. Thank you, Rob. Item 3. Marsden Street, Kirkham.
Which one do you want to do next, John?
3.
Okay, item 3, Marsden Street in Kirkham. So this is a scheme for, well, Marsden Street is just off Polton Street, so just off the main centre of Kirkham. So this is Town End, the Morrisons, go up the hill, over the brow of the hill to Market Square. So you've got a series of residential terrace streets on Marsden Street and around there. This particular site is being used by Harrison's Builders. It's their builder's yard. And the proposal that they're looking to do is to erect 4 dwellings on it, a terrace of 4 properties, 2-storey properties. The Town Council objected to it initially because they felt, quite rightly, that there was a pedestrian access to the rear of them that crossed their land. So that they can't do that without obviously having the Parish Council or Town Council's approval. So that element of the scheme has been revised, gone back to the Town Council, but they've restated their concerns over the parking arrangements. So just to go through the scheme, this is the site in question. So the plans aren't brilliant, but you've got residential properties at the front, and the land at the rear is used more as a builder's yard. The proposal is to clear that away and construct a terrace of 4 properties on it. This area at the side here is the green area that the Town Council were concerned about. So this is some site pictures. So unsurprisingly, from a builder's yard, it looks like a builder's yard. So this is looking from Poplar Street to the rear. So this is the properties at the distance are the ones that front onto Marsden Street. And the properties that are being proposed would sit alongside this dwelling that you can just see on this site picture. And all this builder's paraphernalia would go, no speakers. So the top image here is essentially the street scene view from where the first picture was taken. So you can just see the end of that property there, and the grey blocks are the properties that you could see in the background across the builder's yard. So it's a terrace of 4 properties, entrance on the side for the 2 end ones, front doors in the middle here, and then to replace this pedestrian access across the open space, there's a passageway through the middle of the building that allows access into the rear gardens of the 2 central properties. So on plan view, awful plan, that's the passage through, ground floor, driveway either side for the 2 entrance properties. So the parish council, town council, I keep saying, town council are concerned about parking levels. The end properties provide 2, probably 3 parking spaces. The central properties provide a single parking space, which is in front of the property. So alongside that parking space, there is a pedestrian access route and there is a small sort of grass area. But we again felt that the compromise in terms of achieving some greenery on the frontage of the site was preferable to hard surfacing it all as car parking areas, particularly given the location is 1 street away from the town centre where there's all the shops and services, the schools down the road, train station. You've got a highly accessible location. So we felt that a single parking space for those properties, particularly given the sort of terraced nature of the area, wasn't of a particular concern, particularly given that the 2 outer properties were providing the parking to standards. First floor, that's just the first floor plans. That shows that you're looking at they're all 2-bedroom properties, so they're not the largest dwellings anyway. This just pulls together all the things that I've said. So the schemes, it's in the settlement where residential is supported. The schemes of appropriate design and scale to respect its neighbours. It's well separated from those neighbouring properties to achieve amenity standards. The access is fine. The Highway Authority don't have any objections to it, providing that the parking is provided as we've said. They're comfortable with the single space in the 2 dwellings, and I've talked about the Town Council and recommend for approval. Thank you.
I still think it's naive in this day and age to think that 2-bedroom properties are going to have 1 car each, but there's very little we can do about that because it's the world we live in and we just like chugging up people parking on pavements and causing problems. I guess it's going to have no electrical charging points, but by the time it's built, it'd be legal to have an electric car. So I don't know why we're building houses with that, which we can't actually support cars when they're built. I don't know how we're going to charge those out of flats. I don't know what that's been agreed on. Doubt if anything has been. But yeah, I'm happy to approve. Why not? Nobody else seems to care in the government, so why not?
Yeah, this scheme, as far as I'm aware, doesn't include for any specific electric charging point within the design, but it does have curtilage parking, so there is that opportunity of doing it, and it is permitted development to add a charging point to your property. So they would be able to implement that. Although,
Sorry, Chair, on that, we've already just on that particular point, because it's going to get bigger and bigger. When it comes to flats and integrating a power point that's going to run from a top tier flat downstairs to the bottom to put it on their meters at a retrospective cost, it's going to cost thousands and thousands to implement those on flats. And if they're not built in on design, it's not going to happen. And by the time this flat's built, it'll almost be legal that you can't buy petrol cars anymore. So we're just building for expensive, impossible situations. I know it's not possible
No,
to do
you make
anything.
a very valid point, but it's not a planning issue, it's a builders' regs issue, isn't it?
Chairman,
And I think government are trying to attend to that.
Chairman, can I help on perhaps with both of you? It is a planning point, and there are planning implications from it, and there is a planning policy. There is an element of the local plan that encourages the provision of EV charging points within development. Encourages, but doesn't require. Now, the local plans team are currently working on a SPD, supplementary planning document relating to parking standards, and that will include reference to EV points. But coming back to, so that will deal with how we might take that going further forward in decisions as legislation changes, technology changes, as Councillor Armitt highlights. One thing that perhaps I didn't make clear, and I apologise to Councillor Armitt for this, that these aren't flats, these are houses. So the owners will have a parking space for themselves on curtilage, so they won't have to run leads from upstairs and stuff. Obviously they could if they wanted, but they wouldn't have to do that. They will have the opportunity to provide that in a more traditional way.
Yeah, I mean, this particular scheme, when you consider the builder's yard in terms of improving public amenity and the character of the area, it's a transformation. And the residential development with some parking, remembering that it's in a sustainable location, it's not far from the town centre. The design's acceptable. I think they're quite attractive, the houses. And it is what it is. So I'd like to second this. Thank you.
It's been moved and
Okay, 52 Kirkham Road in Freckleton. Wharton, Freckleton Bypass, Kirkham Road goes up to Kirkham. This site's just near the traffic lights there, hopefully familiar to some of us. It's an area of, the application site's a relatively narrow strip of land to the rear of that property, and there's a couple of what I imagine were originally hen cabins on there, but which are now in commercial use. The site's in the green belt, and the application here is to extend one of those properties with a storage, additional storage space, as the business that's using it is expanded to a point where the boxes piled everywhere when I went. The application's here at committee because the parish council raised objections, partly on the grounds of it being greenbelt, but also over concerns over the access arrangements. Now, went back to the parish council on that, and they have restated particularly the highway safety point, the narrowness of the width. So that's as it's in the late observations that you've had circulated today. Just to a bit more detail about the site. So, aerial photo. So you've got frontage dwellings mainly, a couple of commercial properties, and then some of them have longer garden areas. This one's been developed for many years, and like I said, there's a couple of buildings on it. In this plan on the right-hand side, the grey is the existing, the pink is roughly the extension that's being proposed. So in plan view terms, the existing building's that bit and the extension's that bit. So it's a considerable increase in the area, and in the green belt, obviously that's something that we need to look at. No speakers. So I'll come back to the scale element in a point, but in a second. We're just running through some images of the site. This is looking down Kirkham Road from Kirkham towards Freckleton. The site's on the left-hand side. In this image, it's up that access point. So this is a chiropodist, and that's a dwelling, and the access point comes up here, which, helpfully, is through there. And when you get through there, you see these two buildings. So the one on the left is in use as an office-type use. The one on the right is the one that's being extended, which is in a storage and distribution use. It's nutrition supplements and the like that's being distributed out of there. You see there's an extensive car parking area to the front. To the back, the land's relatively unused. So the building extension, to the building, is roughly sitting, if you look at the left-hand picture and imagine that was taken with the back to the building, it runs up to where that caravan goes. So that caravan's looking the other way, it's the same caravan. So that gives you an indication of the scale. In Greenbelt terms, policy GD2 is a local plan policy. That simply directs you to the MPPF, which sets out that where development's inappropriate, and there's a requirement to maintain the openness. This site has a bit of planning history with it, in that there was previously a detached building on that site, on that concrete base, and that was used as an office, was refused planning permission and by this council 2011, and has been removed following enforcement action around that time. Now that was done as a consequence of the conflict that building had with Greenbelt policy that was in place at the time, so 2011 pre-MPPF, where there was a stricter role approach to Greenbelt policy taken than is currently the case. At the time we also had objections from the Highway Authority, and that building was a detached building used for an office purpose, so it had quite a turnover of staff, and you've seen that the access is relatively narrow. So all those led to a refusal of that application, enforcement action, and obviously the building was removed and the site's laying unused. Now, since then, government policy has changed. MPPF is supportive of rural economic development, business diversity and the like. It's also permits in Greenbelt limited infilling of previously developed land. And the view that we're taking here is that this clearly is previously developed land, and whilst it's not infill in the way that we might describe infill in terms of the minor infill in the countryside, this is filling in that area of land behind the existing building. It's well contained within the boundaries of the site. You've got landscaping to horticultural lands on either side of it. So with that change, with the storage use that's now being proposed, it's expansion of an existing rural business, we've taken the view that pragmatically this is a scheme that should now be supported. In terms of the access, that's not being changed, and it is narrow, clearly you can see from the pictures. LCC Highways have not raised an objection to this scheme, and officers are of the view that, officers are of the view that for a storage use, and having sort of been to the site myself, spoken to the applicant a couple of times about it, their vehicles, the vehicles that they get in and out, recognise the fact that that access is restricted. So they're looking at transit vans and the like, which are capable of getting through the access and capable of turning on that parking area. So they feel that, and I feel that the access arrangements are acceptable. There are conditions that ensure that it is used for storage rather than the more intensive use or a different use that might be more likely to attract HGVs. There's no neighbour impacts. It's obviously separated from the neighbours either side, and the level of activity from a storage use remains relatively limited. And on that basis, the application is recommended for approval.
Thank you, Andrew. This is only a few hundred yards down the road from where I live, in Kirkham Road. It's a long-standing activity. It hasn't created any problems in the past, and I, from the chair, move approval. Frank?
Could I just ask for a tiny bit of a clarification there, that when the building is in situ, cars will still be able to go down that narrow entrance and park, and vehicles will still be able to come and trade off. So it's on this side, the left side of that picture?
Yes, to clarify you on that. So this building is not associated with the development. It's this building that's being extended. So, and it's the development, the extension is entirely to the rear. So you've got all this frontage area that must be able to take, I don't know, 10 cars, what have you, in a line, as well as this central corridor. And the extension is the width of the building, so it's not widening it. You'd still have the opportunity to get that caravan out if you needed to.
And there's a turning circle bit at the end, yes?
There is a turning area within this frontage. It narrows down slightly, so the turning area is at the front, but it's well... Which way do we go? The turning, the best area for turning is this area. So that's the access point into the site here. So that picture I've just shown you was taken from where the red laser is there. So you've still got an area available for turning in this area here. Certainly for getting cars in and out. Transit vans would perhaps struggle if all the parking spaces were used, but they would be able to get between the buildings and use the area at the end. And when the case officer's been and taken those pictures, there's a handful of cars at the most. It's not. I appreciate where a different use might use that area more intensively, and I think that was part of the reason when it was an office and you had a dozen staff there, all with cars. I think that's where we had concerns previously, but I don't think we do at the moment.
So I'd be happy to second that.
Yeah, just really quickly. I mean, I think that's just the road parallel next door to way down to Tommy's, and I've driven transit vans down those roads. I've turned them around, I've brought them back, collecting things from up there. It's not difficult. I think you struggle to notice those entrances. You have to really look for them. You can drive past them and have to come back and find them twice. So impact on the countryside, you've really got to go looking for it to find where these things are. And that current development, because I got lost up there trying to find Tommy's, it's really ugly. And it's an ugly car park with ugly buildings on. So sticking something down there isn't going to have any visual impact to anybody unless you're lost. And of course, supporting business is fantastic. So yeah, really happy to go for this.
Yeah, I'd like to support this application as well. Just one question, though, that I'd like to clarification, really. Because this is more sensitive because it's in the green belt, and we talked about infilling and the exception, is probably applicable here, so I agree with that. But in this case, when the proposed extension is to provide additional storage capacity, going back to the Slurry Lagoon argument, is there any requirement anywhere for a business who wants to infill in the green belt to actually justify on what basis they require that additional building as part of their business? Or is that not a planning issue? It just came to me because of the other argument, Andrew.
It isn't. There isn't a... Where our our countryside policy talks about there being a need for the development, Greenbelt policy doesn't require that evidence of that. it just talks about what's inappropriate, and it talks about exceptions, and it says that limited infilling of existing previously developed sites where there isn't a greater impact on openness and where it doesn't cause substantial harm is acceptable. It doesn't also add, and where the applicant is able to demonstrate that they need it for, you know, more storage or more, you know, welfare facilities for staff or whatever it might be.
Yeah. And I go back to Councillor Nixon's previous point with the other application is why would they invest in doing this if they didn't need it?
Well, having been to the site, it's so they can probably get in the building because there's so much stock in the existing building. It's absolutely rammed. Okay. Mill Cottage is near the windmill in Staining, which isn't in Staining. It's outside the settlement, so this is the, for those who know Staining, this is Staining, this is the plough, this is Mill Lane as it goes up towards Poulton, Hardhorn, Poulton area. Windmill and Mill Cottage are up there. This is also in the Greenbelt. It's land to the rear of those cottage, there's kind of a cluster of 4 or 5 dwellings there. And this is a retrospective application for the use of part of that site for extended garden area, but also to form an additional access point onto Mill Lane, which supports access to an equestrian facility. The Parish Council have objected to the access elements of the application because they feel that there isn't a need for that access and they wish to see that the hedge is reinstated. To show you where we're talking about, these are the application property is Mill Cottage, so the green shading, hatching that you can hopefully see, that's the domestic curtilage that's lawful to that property. What they're looking to do in this application is extend it to the rear and the side, and it wraps around the rear of a couple of neighbouring properties as well. It kind of rounds off, I suppose, this line with the curtilage of other properties, which sits in with the way that it's shown it's occurred on the ground. That's the windmill. So it kind of lines in with that area. There's also an area to the side which provides some domestic parking for them. The access point is roughly there, and that leads to this building, which is one of 2 stable buildings on the site, sand paddock, and then a grass paddocks that extend in that direction. So the area has changed over time, and these are some Google Earth images that go back in time. So that's the one I've just shown you, relatively recent. Previously, before the extension of the curtilage, also before the extension of the curtilage and one of the stable buildings, and then before the extension of the curtilage and any of the stable buildings. So there has been some expansion of the cluster of development in that area in the last 21 years. What does it look like? Well, this is relating to the access point. So this is the same image from Google Street View this time, to show you what it was like 4 years ago and what it's like now. So you've got a field gate that's been put into the hedge line here, which, as I said, serves this equestrian facility. See, it's on a relatively straight part of Staining. Is it Staining Old Road there? Old Road there, yeah. Which is a particularly narrow and difficult road. As anybody who's ever used it will probably regret having done so. and it's opposite this access point to this, this larger dwelling on the other side. Some pictures of the garden area. So this is from the lawful access. So these are the stable buildings I mentioned. This is an area of parking. And then this is the area of garden area that's been extended into. So you can see, obviously see the windmill, and you can see this fencing area that's been erected around that garden. Different views across it. And then you can see that this land's in equestrian use beyond there. So in the green belt, we're back to GD2, back to the MPPF. And this time it's paragraph 150, which deals with inappropriate development, where we're looking at uses of land, and that requires that they are maintained in openness, and says that development's not in conflict with the MPPF requirements regarding openness for material changes of use, where that openness is preserved. So the view here is whether there is an impact on openness from the establishment of that fencing and the use of that area as garden, perhaps compared to how it might be used or is being used as equestrian land with fences around it and horses on it. Now, the impact of openness in garden areas typically comes from when you put buildings in. So if you put outbuildings and the like up in those areas. So with that in mind, we've come to the view that this isn't impacting the openness, but we've imposed a restriction on the removal of permitted development rights, so that any outbuildings in that area would require planning permission, and then we would obviously assess them against Greenbelt policy with regards their impact on openness, should any be proposed. Going on way. In terms of the access, the Highway Authority haven't objected to it. Obviously, they're the consultee that we go to, so they're of the view that because of the limited use that an equestrian access would take, and that people are familiar with that use because they're going to look after their horses, they know where the gate is, it's not a livery use as such, then there isn't that highway safety concern. Turning to the Parish Council's comments, clearly the loss of the hedge does lead to some harm to the rural character of the area, because they saw from the pictures that the hedges were well established down both sides, but feel that the level of loss in terms of it being a field gate isn't such that it could justify a reason for refusal of the application, and that leads us to a recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Just going back to the Parish Council's objection, it's not to the use of the gardened area at all. Nobody's concerned about that whatsoever. But historically, that hedge was taken down and a gate put in there as a temporary measure to allow building vehicles access to some extensions and some building work that was going on previously from the previous owner when he sold the property, and the council were always assured that that gated area, that access area, would be reinstated. I think it probably was on some form of documents at some point that area would be put back as a hedgerow. Obviously now they're applying for it as a second access to separate basically the home and the equestrian, which is rented out for somebody's personal, well, as a stable for somebody to use. Once over, the homeowner owned the stable. He's now sold the whole lot, and he rents out the stable area and doesn't live in the home anymore. So the new people want their own access, which they have got, and it is a big access. It's a big double gated access into their into the property, and you can quite easily get horse vehicles, because they used to bring their own horse vehicles into the property to go to the stables at the side. So you can go that way to the stables and that way to the gardens, and that extra opening was basically well, we promised that it would be put back as hedge, and that's why the objection has come, because it should be put back as hedge, really.
What's your position?
With the parish council, because it was opened as a temporary access for building. The building's now finished and done, so I do feel that it should be put back as a hedge.
Well, that's addressed, that's fine.
So this is September, whatever that says, 22. So this is the dwelling at Mill. This is the application property. And I think, as Councillor Nixon says, that dwelling was also the owners of this land to the side. They actually, and that's the gate in question, they actually had planning permission for a dwelling in that area. And I think that's there was a requirement on that planning permission that they could form a temporary access to facilitate the construction of the dwelling, but then had to reinstate that and use the access to the house, i.e. that access, as the operational one. That planning permission has lapsed. They've not implemented it. So that's not there, but what has happened is that this access was formed, and I suspect it might have been formed at the time that this property has undergone some fairly considerable renovations in the last few years. So I suspect it was done at the time of that, because the building work was taking place on this access, and with this separation that Councillor Nixon refers to of the equestrian and the residential, the equestrian formed a separate access, whether it was them or the landowner, I don't know. So I think that's probably the background to it, which perhaps ties in with Councillor Nixon's understanding. But the decision we need to make is whether this access is acceptable or not necessarily whether it was something that should have been restored and hasn't. And that's where I've looked at it and looked at what the Highway Authority have said, and they've said that it's not unsafe for the equestrian use. They've said that, and so they've not raised objections to it. They've also, I've looked at it and thought, well, you know, the visual impact of it isn't particularly out of character as a rural field gate on a rural lane in a rural area. And one of the sort of concerns I have with that is that we've got this next over the road, which perhaps is much more out of character. And if we are to refuse an application here for this access, the two things we could attack it for would be highway safety and would be visual impact. And with the Highway Authority not raising an issue with it, and with that context for the visual impact over the road, I'm a little bit nervous. And that's where we are. The condition that required it isn't in force because that planning permission has lapsed.
Right.
So we're just looking at this as, is this development acceptable or not?
Is this acceptable?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'd move to approve. LCC haven't come back with any objections. I think, as you say, on the grandiose villa-style gates opposite it, you know, you can look at Richard Ansdell, you can look at Constable. The most definition thing of an art of the countryside is the farm gate. And now it's not a very beautiful farm gate, but it doesn't take away from countryside to have a gate in the farm, whereas you've got your villa-style one on the opposite. So, yeah, I'll move to approve.
Vice Chairman.
Yeah, I used to live just down the road from here, and so I know the roads in Staining. And I'm going to support it in the end, but I am surprised that Lancashire have not express concerns about the access here, because I have seen at certain times the amount of traffic that goes down a very narrow road, and often at speed. So there's the reality of somebody living in that community, but where we have the Highways Authority advice that, you know, no objection, which is obviously definitive in this case. What I would like to do, Andrew, if we could, is just go back to the original plan showing the, you know, the other properties. It was just a how they all joined up really, and that slice of land that they're wanting to take. And again, it's in Greenbelt, isn't it? So it's yeah. I mean, there's a fence there. I look at that and I sort of go, and I'm only asking this question because it's a logical one to ask for me, is that Mill Cottage and where that fence comes across, that extension of that land, you could sort of fully logically understand the requirement to actually have that as it wraps around their own property. What I find very strange, and I'm sure there's no planning reason why we shouldn't, but to extend the land that they want, I think it's Windhoek, I think, it's the next one, beyond that, which to some extent is bound to compromise that property, and Mill House, and Staining Windmill. What are they doing? What is their plan in that further extension of the garden beyond fence type B, is it, or something? Yeah. You know, that slice there that clearly to a person looking at that, you've got to say would compromise the amenity of the three other properties, because they're running right at the bottom of their gardens or down the side. So any activity in the garden is going to be intrusive to some extent. So I'm just raising that because when I looked at the plan, I thought, yeah, I could sort of, if I was living in one of those houses, I would sort of go, I could understand the Mill Cottage bit coming round, but then going all the way round down to Staining Windmill, which affects three additional properties, I don't know what their thinking is there. And it does concern me a little that, you know, effectively all those garden areas of Windhoek, Mill House and Staining Windmill are compromised.
Right, but you did say you were going to support the application.
Yeah, but I would like Andrew just to tell me if there's any planning substance in.
Well, my understanding of it is that the land is owned by the owners of Mill Cottage, who have made this application, but they are. I've been in discussions with their neighbours about them taking on the element that's behind their properties. So how that works exactly, I don't know. But as a land use, the application is to change the use of the land to domestic curtilage. Whether that then becomes the domestic curtilage to 1, 2 or 3 properties wouldn't involve any planning implications. If I was the owner of either of those 2 properties, I would, like yourself, have been curious about it and would have made comment on the application perhaps, but none of them have. So that perhaps gives some credence to that suggestion that there has been some, you know, some arrangement for that to happen.
Yeah, I wondered about that.
But our assessment has to be whether it's likely to create an amenity issue. And with that in mind, that's another reason for the removal of permitted development rights that would prevent it being used for putting a great big massive garden room or whatever in there, and swimming pool and hot tub and all the rest of the paraphernalia.
Chairman, can I just in terms of the actual aerial photograph, doesn't that show that the garden, that's Windhoek, is actually got the garden?
Yeah.
So it just runs through. I don't know if you can point to it, Andrew, on the aerial, but if you go back to that plan, what I'm saying is it doesn't make any difference because that's the way it is. Yeah, but if you go back to your plan, Andrew, of the application and your presentation, that one. So where it says Windhoek and there's there's what looks like a building above, which isn't there on the aerial photograph. That boundary there is the boundary running on the plan. So the garden doesn't wrap around Windhoek. It looks as though it includes Windhoek's extension. So it's both Mill Cottage and Windhoek's garden that's extended, isn't it?
Yeah, so that's solid. So that solid line that's shown as fence type B is there anyway,
Yeah.
isn't it? Yeah. So what you're not seeing is this fence type C that would run somewhere down there and line up with to reflect the red line, and then that comes down there, doesn't it?
So yeah.
And I do concede that, you know, there have been no objections from these neighbouring properties, but I felt it was worth raising.
To clarify that for all, hopefully, that picture shows the area. So, yeah, in fact, I could have shown this earlier, couldn't I? That's fence A, between the land and the equestrian land. That's the fence between Mill Cottage and Windhoek.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the extension of it that comes down to the bottom fence line. So this is the equestrian land behind. So it is already subdivided between the three neighbours, which perhaps explains why
Okay.
they didn't object.
That helps, thank you.
It's another site I've been to recently, so. Moss Side Farm, Lytham Road, Westmead. So this is next to Moss Side Rail Halt, between Ray Green over here and Balham Road, top end of Lytham over here. It's an agricultural site, or farm as they call them. The agricultural activity ceased some time ago around Foot and Mouth, and the site now operates much more as an industrial type activity. It's in the countryside, and this application relates to the use of some dog related activity taking place from the farmhouse, who have some kennels, they have a daycare element, and they've set up 3 fields as dog fields where you hire the field and take your dog for exercise. So this application relates to 2 of the fields that are being used for dog exercise only. The kennels has planning permission, albeit it's being used more intensively than it should be. The daycare doesn't have planning permission and is subject to enforcement investigations that are ongoing. And the 3rd of the fields doesn't have planning permission, and we are advised that it will be ceasing very shortly. The Parish Council have objected to this application largely on grounds of noise and odour amenity type issues related from dog use on the site, although it's not clear whether it's dog use from these fields or whether it's this wider dog use that takes place. There are some late observations on this one, where an additional neighbour has written to largely restate comments that have been made previously. And also the applicant has written, or the applicant's agent's written in, the agent's from London, and they've written in to say that they agree with the recommendation, which is good of them. So the application site, so this is the farmhouse here, stables are in here. This is the field that's being used that's going to stop being used. So the application isn't for that field, it's for this field here and this field here. And you can see that these are the former farm buildings that are now largely in an industrial use. So this is rotated round. So this shows that there's where you've got a site access, you've got that field they're not using, the railway line, and then the two fields that they are using. No speakers. Some images. Very wet day when the case officer went, so not the greatest image, but you see it's got a very wide former agricultural access to it from Lytham Road. Got a series of these buildings that are now in various commercial uses. One of the buildings on site is a polytunnel that's within one of the fields that's being proposed for this application, so you can see that there's somebody walking and exercising the dog in there just by chance when the case officer turned up. So they've got this indoor facility in this polytunnel, and then they've got these other fields that are just fenced off, and you hire your field, you make your bookings online, hire the field for an hour, half an hour, and there you go. So it's in the countryside, so back to policy GD4, they get back to policy GD4A, which permits development for agricultural uses, but it also permits development for other uses that are appropriate for a rural area. Obviously dog exercise is something that takes place in rural and urban areas, but it is something that can create amenity issues if dogs are being run off the leads in urban areas. So quite often you do find these dog fields are more typically in rural locations. So this is a rural location. The farm's not in active use. The land's therefore not necessarily in any agricultural use. This activity takes place without any real change to the land. There's no buildings going on it or anything like that. It's just being fenced off, and a bit of the car park and gravel tracks being used for parking. Noise, clearly an issue, and it's where the parish council have had their complaints. The council's environmental protection team have been involved in those, and it seems more likely than not that the complaints are coming from the dog fields and the kennel and the daycare use that is much closer to the residential properties. The application's been submitted with a noise assessment, which the environmental protection team are satisfied with, and that concludes the same, that the noise, the use of the fields near to the properties would be an issue, but the use of the fields away from the properties is adequately separated that it isn't. And so that's where there's no objection from them. But to ensure it's operated appropriately, we're suggesting conditions to limit the use to daytime, limit the number of dogs, make sure that parking is used that's alongside the site. And there's also been an issue about waste. It seems that the operators have been collecting the waste and then storing it at the bottom of somebody's garden, which they then use before they spread it on their fields as a fertiliser. That's led to some quite understandable amenity issues from about that. So there's a plan that requires a specific area that's as far away from the houses as possible to be used for storing the dog waste, and the condition that relates to that. There's no access issues, well established access onto one of the main routes across the borough. So recommend that planning permission is granted as the agenda papers.
Tim?
Sure, really happy to approve. There's some great ironies here, isn't there? That irony number one, Farnborough Council has been trying to stop people walking dogs freely in every place they possibly can. So when somebody wants to help the people left, now we're going to close it down for them. The other irony is, of course, the countryside people fought like crazy to keep fox hunting and have wild hounds and making as much noise as they possibly could. And of course, if they went back to farming and it was a turkey farm, you had 20,000 turkeys, it'd be a lot noisier than a few dogs in the daytime. So I can't find any problems with that whatsoever. Great to have a business doing it. Great to have someone to take your dog. I thought it was verging on illegal to use carnivore-based waste to fertilise because there's toxics in it that you don't get from herbivore-based animals. I don't think we should be doing that at all. But other than that, yeah, very happy to approve.
Someone second that?
I'll second that.
Do you wish to speak?
No.
No? Any more contributors? No? In that case, we'll go straight to the vote. Moved by Councillor Tim Armit, seconded by Vice Chairman for approval. All in favour, please show.
Good morning, all. Chairman and Vice Chairman, submitted a tree preservation order. The background for the tree preservation order to be confirmed is that the area, the location that the trees are in, just north of Mill Lane, Elswick, and this at the moment is under a development, and as per development and through the planning application, there was no reason why to put a TPO on the trees because everything looked like it should done through TEP consultancy. However, on a site visit, if you go on to the next, please, that's the area and the aerial view. So the trees that have been protected are mainly on the edge of the area.
Sorry, this is going very, very slowly, so let me just...
So just on the outer edges of the area, as you can see from there, and then that's the aerial view. I was called to take a look at the location through the enforcement officer due to some of the works that's gone on, and on my visit I found that's part of the tree there and the location, but on my visit I found that this hedge had been removed and there is heritage fencing installed. However, it's well within the root protection area of the trees, and you can see the protection fencing up against the trees, and they've graded off the soil, which has actually gone further down to the top surface of the sod, and if you go a bit further, that shows a bit more of the depth, and then again there's damage to tree roots on that one, and where they've graded off with the grading bucket from the diggers, that's the top surface, basically the roots they've graded off and scraped off. So seeing that, in my opinion, the trees needed some sort of further protection. So I served a TPO on the developers and then all interested parties, including some of the trees that are neighbouring some properties. We did get an objection in, and the objection to the tree preservation order was mainly the development rather than the trees. That the properties should be moved further away from trees. Then there was an objection due to the fact that drainage pipes, the installation of the drainage pipes for the properties could impact on the root system, but as mentioned, these were part of an application, and applications were 18318 and 20875 to discharge conditions, and as per the arboricultural method statement through TP Tree Consultancy in 2020, I didn't see there was any at the time warranted a tree preservation order, but obviously seeing those, I thought that the trees needed further protection, and it's an ongoing issue with the enforcement officer and planning with how they proceed with their development at the moment. So it's just an added tool to our box, really, for protection measures for the trees. From all that information and the order, the recommendation is that the committee members are asked to confirm the order without any modifications.
Question from the Vice Chairman.
Yes, I mean, I fully support this action. I just wanted to ask Andrew, in the past, when situations perhaps similar to this have occurred, how effective is the action that we're proposing here in terms of preserving the existing? I mean, does it normally work in terms of, or are there further breaches in it, you know?
I hope there's no further breaches, and the request, well, if you go within the root protection area of the trees, if there's any impacts on the trees, it carries a bit more substantial weight, as well as any breaches of conditions from a planning application. It helps the enforcement officer to come at the developer in a more weighted argument. However, if there is further works to be carried out within the root protection area of trees or pruning of trees, then we hope that they use their arboricultural consultants and that all work should be supervised and signed off, and it's all as per planning applications, it should all be signed off. So it's just an added tool to the planning development area, really.
But it's a bit like a shot across the bows as well, isn't
yes,
it?
Yes, it's a warning sign that, yeah.
Just ask a general question, not specific, about trees and design for plans. So my garden's got 9 trees in it, and now 80 years later, the trees have all gone into the drains, causing havoc with the waterways. And if someone had said at the time, don't build your outflow waste pipes there because there's going to be tree roots will grow into it. But if these guys come in and they put in water flows now, by the time they sell the houses, and for the next 5 or 6 years they won't have any problem, they'll just inherit the problem as the trees grows. Are they advised on water outflow and not putting near trees and tree roots and things in their designs by you guys?
That's a conversation that's probably not necessarily for this meeting because it's quite open. It's a common misconception that tree roots will go into perfectly sound drainage pipes unless there's an issue with the drainage pipe or it's an open pipe and then there's a gully. Then the tree roots have difficulty accessing water anywhere else. It's not in their interest to break solid pipes. It's just a waste of energy. If there is an issue with solid pipes, then it's the pipe itself or the way it's been laid, it's on some rocks and it's split and it's cracked and the trees have just taken advantage of that situation. So with the new modern building, when it comes to foundations and pipes, they should be installing better quality pipes than they used to many years ago, and some places will have a root protection barrier around the pipes to reduce any potential issues.
Okay.
Yeah, true, and again, it's probably on a different meeting. Tree roots are normally within the first 600 mil of the ground. If you build a property next to a tree, if there's a fault or a defect with the foundation or a pipe, and there's water, accessible water, if the tree needs that extra water, it will take advantage of that situation. It's a misconception that it seems to be the tree's fault rather than the property.
I'd like to move the recommendation.
And I will second that. All in favour of the
Still got a
recommendation?
question.
Just, I think Frank's got a question.
Thanks, sorry.
Sorry, just very briefly, a very simple clarification. If a tree with a tree preservation order breaks a pipe that causes flooding, which has priority, does the owner have to repair the pipe and take the tree down, or does the tree preservation order say the tree's got to stay?
If it's causing flooding issues, then yes, that would highways and what utilities would supersede a tree preservation order, but we would seek to have a replacement.
Yeah, thank you.
I think it's already been agreed as part of the planning application because only half of the site's been developed. The rest of it's going to be green infrastructure, so a walkway and like a meadowed area. So initially, when I was consulted on the application, I had no further issue. I had no issues.